Finally, an agreement has been reached and signed in Sudan. The ruling generals and the leaders of the protest have just endorsed the sharing of power during the transition period. Johnny Clegg, the South African artist-musician, bowed out yesterday at age 66. The White Zulu succumbed to cancer that has been plaguing him for years. While the African Cup of Nations playing in Egypt is getting to an end, the African Confederation of Football has just unveiled the method which will be adopted in the African Zone playoffs for the Football World Cup to be played in Qatar in 2022. That's all for our top stories today. Stay tuned for more details in this newscast. After months of negotiations between the military in power since April and the protest movement, a new wind blows over Khartoum. Military and civilian finally signed a power-sharing agreement during the transition period. The two parties initialed a political statement after a night of discussions to finalize the remaining terms of an agreement reached on July 5th. At the end of the meeting, the second-in-command of the ruling military council, Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, welcomed a historic moment. Theater of rivalry supported, according to some experts, by the involvement of several powerful countries. Khartoum had been living in slow motion for almost 2 months. The streets were largely empty, although a few buses were running. The Sudanese capital seemed hesitant, caught between the call for civil disobedience launched by the Alliance for Freedom and Change, spearhead of the protest movement, and the need to earn some money. For weeks, a huge crowd sitting on the street had demanded the establishment of a civil government. Last week, a violent crackdown struck the protesters, killing at least 120 people and injuring hundreds. Negotiations between military and civilians had then resumed, and the end of the tunnel seems to have been reached. Despite strong resistance from large carbon dioxide emitters, South Africa, 14th largest polluter in the world according to Greenpeace, became the first country on the continent on June 1st to introduce a carbon tax entirely at the expense of business corporates.
I think the whole issue of just transition is important, particularly of low-income workers or those working in coal mines, that they shouldn't be made to feel the brunt of policies on climate change. The burden needs to be equally shared, particularly
in the mining industry, a sector already in crisis. 6,800 direct and indirect jobs will be eliminated in the next 2 years because of the carbon tax, warned the National Chamber of Mines, which worries the producers.
As I said, we employ about 400 people. If carbon tax get to a point where we simply cannot afford it, there are no other ways to reduce our emissions, and we will simply be forced to close our plant, and that will mean the loss of around 400 jobs.
But as it is now, it means for the next 3 years we'll have a tax that will send a signal but effectively will not really contribute to reduce emissions. That is our fear. And when we look at the time frame that we have, it feels like 3 years lost, which we can't really afford.
On the field, the oil industry has already passed on the tax to consumers by increasing the price of fuels. The national electricity company, Eskom, with a debt of 26 billion euros, supplies most of its electricity with coal-fired power plants. It is the biggest polluter in South Africa, responsible for 30% of its carbon dioxide emissions, according to Greenpeace. Asi Bonanga, a clever blend of Xhosas and Zulu notes, dotted with originality and modernity, a cult song released at the height of apartheid that has sounded for decades as the rhythm of rapprochement. The author, Johnny Clegg, just passed away at the age of 66 after several years of fighting cancer. He played a major role in South Africa by uniting the Rainbow Nation through his music. Johnny Clegg drew his inspiration from the Zulu culture to create revolutionary music, where wild African rhythms coexist with guitar, electric keyboard, and accordion. He he had been successful with his group Savuka. In 1988, their song Asi Bonanga was dedicated to Nelson Mandela, who was then a prisoner and whose photos were forbidden. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa greeted the memory of this musician in a statement on Wednesday, saying an exceptional compatriot and an icon of social cohesion and anti-racism. Johnny Clegg will always live in our hearts and in our homes as we listen to his music, a moving blend of cultural celebration and political resistance, he added. During the worst hours of the racist regime, his songs were banned. To get around censorship, he had then to perform with his band Jaluka, trained with the Zulu musician Sipho in universities, churches, migrant homes, and private homes. Despite all, the apartheid police had banned some of his concerts, and the singer was repeatedly arrested, accused of violating the laws on racial segregation. The title Asi Bonanga, we have not seen it in Zulu language, worldwide hate dedicated to Nelson Mandela, the hero of the anti-apartheid struggle. Some years after the end of apartheid, the author and hero of this song, now free, found themselves on a stage in Frankfurt in Germany for a concert as magical as unexpected. As Johnny Clegg sang Asi Bonanga, the audience stood up like one man. The singer explains, I saw someone from the corner of my eye behind me who was on the stage dancing. It was Nelson Mandela. It was a shock. I didn't even know he was there, said Johnny Clegg. At the end of the song, Nelson Mandela said, it's music and dance that make me at peace with the world. Simply put, music allows to federate and to gather, whether one is black or white. For Earthlings, 2019 is definitely under the sign of the moon. On the other hand, because our satellite offers us this year 2 lunar eclipses, and on the other hand, because of the 50th anniversary of the first steps of man on the moon with Apollo 11 mission. On 16 July 1969, the Apollo 11 team took off for a 195-hour stay in space. On July 21st, around 4 minutes to 10 p.m. on Houston clocks, Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon, saying his legendary phrase, it's a small step for a man, but a giant leap for humanity. Together with his companion Buzz Aldrin, he spent more than 21 hours on the lunar ground, then took off without incident and returned to Earth on July 24th. The first person to contribute to the first steps by a man on the moon is undoubtedly the 35th President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. On 25th May 1961, just a few months after taking off, he launched Apollo space program. In the context of space race with the Soviet Union, the objective of the Apollo missions was from the start to land a manned spaceship on the moon before the end of the 60s. Away at the heart of the Cold War to prove the superiority of the United States in terms of launches, a technology very close to that of missiles. But it was a colossal challenge since the Americans had not even made an orbital flight yet. On 15th July, space memories will be on display. In the new format of the 2022 Football World Cup in Qatar, the 28 least well-off African teams in the FIFA ranking will face one another in a home and away matches during a playoff game. Then the winners of this first round will join the 26 best teams of the continent to participate in a group stage. Once the 40 teams are known, they will be divided into 10 groups of 4. Then the 10 winners of their respective groups will qualify for a double round matches. At the end of these games, the 5 winners of these matches will qualify for the 2022 World Cup. The Confederation of African Football also said that the raffle draw for this first World Cup in this part of the world will take place on July 27th, 6 days after the final of the African Cup of Nations. Finally, an agreement has been reached and signed in Sudan. The ruling generals and the leaders of the protest have just endorsed the sharing of power during the transition period. Johnny Clegg, the South African artist-musician, bowed out yesterday at age 66. The White Zulu succumbed to cancer that has been plaguing him for years. While the African Cup of Nations playing in Egypt is getting to an end, the African Confederation of Football has just unveiled the method which will be adopted in the African Zone playoffs for the Football World Cup to be played in Qatar in 2022. That's the end of our newscast of the day, but keep watching G24 for further news.